so I can talk to y'all better. Seems like we're pretty spread out here. Hope my head's still in the picture. There we go. Anyways, today we're talking about faithfulness. We're actually finishing up our series on the fruit of the Spirit. The last one is faithfulness, not in order as they're listed in the Bible, but in the order in which we did them. And I love that last song, Eternal God, Unchanging. You know, even though he's mysterious and unknown, he is unchanging. Yeah, he's the same today, tomorrow, and forever. And we can trust in him. We can rely on the things he said. And we're going to talk about how we're to be the same as God in that aspect, and that we can be relied upon. We can be trusted in by other people and by God as well. It was interesting as I was studying this topic. The first time I looked at the verse, I looked at it in the KJV because that's what happened to load, and it wasn't faithfulness, it was faith. I was like, that's odd. The fruit of the Spirit is faith. And I looked into the Greek word for it is pistis, which is actually a lesser-known Greek goddess who's the goddess of good faith, trust, and reliability. And that same Greek word is the same word for faith that's used throughout the whole New Testament. It's when he says you must have faith like a mustard seed, or your faith has made you well. That's the same word that we're looking at here. Now, most translations today use faithfulness, and most commentators would say the same. But it's really two sides of the same coin. On one side, you have faith, which is the quality of someone that trusts in someone or something else. And on the flip side of that coin, you have faithfulness, which is the quality of the thing that is trusted. Is it worthy of that faith? Is it reliable? And I think that's probably one of the better words in the English language is reliable. You know, can we be trusted? Can we be relied upon? And why is that important? You know, some people, when the commentators talk about the fruit of the Spirit, some of them will put a colon after love, whereas the fruit of the Spirit is love, and it's defined by all these other things. It's defined by faithfulness, by patience, by gentleness and kindness. And really, faithfulness is a way to show love to other people. It's the love of being reliable, being steadfast. You know, a lot of people rely on you for different things. A child relies on their parent to provide a safe environment, a safe home for them. A spouse may rely on their partner to provide for them financially. Let's say like my wife, she stays at home with the kids, relies on me to go to work, bring home money. And there's a lot of things you rely on people for, and if they fall through, if they're not faithful, it can hurt. It can hurt. So today we're going to look at, first off, you know, this is a character quality of God. That's why it's a fruit of the Spirit. So we're first going to look at how does God express faithfulness, and then we're going to look at what is God's expectation of us in terms of faithfulness. What are some principles that we can live by in that area? So let's pray and get into it. So Father, thank you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for your faithfulness, Lord. Thank you for providing this space we can meet in. Thank you, as we were just singing, that you never change, that you are the same today, yesterday, and forever. We can rely on you, and your promises are true, and we desire to be like you, Father. We desire to be trustworthy, to be faithful to you and the use of what you've given us, to be faithful to each other and those who rely on us, Lord. And just pray that you would help us to really just have a clear sense that we are not our own, but we are bought at a price, we are yours, and that our lives are for your glory, Lord. In Christ's name, amen. First I want to look at Psalm 136. And it's a praise to God, and it says, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his faithfulness is everlasting. Give thanks to the God of gods, for his faithfulness is everlasting. Give thanks to the Lord of lords, for his faithfulness is everlasting. To him who alone does great works, for his faithfulness is everlasting. To him who made the heavens with skill, for his faithfulness is everlasting. To him who spread out the earth above the waters, for his faithfulness is everlasting. To him who made the great lights, for his faithfulness is everlasting. The sun to rule by day, for his faithfulness is everlasting. The moon and the stars to rule by night, for his faithfulness is everlasting." Now, at first, this might sound like a bad Christian song where you repeat the chorus about 30 times, but I think there's a point to this repetition. This is such an important character quality of God. We take for granted how much we rely on God and the things that he's made and put into to order. I mean, just think about, it's starting here talking about his creative ability, that he created the universe. When I think of the faithfulness of God, I usually start with maybe his faithfulness to Israel or to Adam and Eve or something, but like creation, have you thought about faithfulness in that regard? Like if a human being builds something, it may last for a few years. Maybe your car makes it to 20 years if you're lucky. Not a lot of things humans build last for a long time. You got the pyramids, but they don't really do anything, right? They just sit there. You can expect them to still be there when you wake up in the morning. But think about this system in creation that God has put together. And just that faithful people build faithful things that you can rely upon. I expect the sun to come up in the morning. I imagine most of you do as well. This system that God has put into motion continues to operate, and it's something that we rely on for life and just kind of take for granted the faithfulness of God there. Now we're going to read the rest of this psalm, and for brevity, I'm going to leave off the second half of every verse. I think you got the point, right? His faithfulness is everlasting. So let's get into it. So in verse 10, to him who struck the Egyptians, that is their firstborn, talking about the last of the 10 plagues, and brought Israel out of their midst, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, to him who divided the Red Sea in parts, and allowed Israel to pass through the midst of it. For he overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea. So it's talking about God's faithfulness to Israel. So back farther before that, God made a promise to Abraham that he was going to make a great nation out of him. And he called him out of his family, told him to move to this land he hadn't been to before. Now, that's a lot harder than I think we think of moving today. Like if God told you to move to Texas, you got roads to get there. There's still the rule of law out there for the most part. And it's not like, it wasn't that way for Abraham. Like he was leaving safety and security, going in a dangerous route, and he didn't know what was coming. And the faithfulness of God had to be a real thing to him. And God made a promise to him that he was going to give him descendants greater than the sands of the sea. And it took 25 years till that promise was fulfilled for the first child. Not much beyond that. And then also he told him that his descendants were going to be in captivity for 400 years, and then they would be set free. Now, if you were one of his descendants like 300 or 200 years in, you might be feeling a little discouraged. But he came through. He was faithful with that promise, and he set them free. And he brought them into the wilderness. As it picks up in verse 16, to him who led the people through the wilderness, to him who struck great kings, brought death to mighty kings, Sihon king of the Amorites, and Og king of Bashan, and gave their land as an inheritance to his servant Israel. Just talk about the faithfulness of God of leading them into the promised land that he had given to them. And it must have been a hard thing for Moses to lead them on that path. I can't imagine taking 10 people through the wilderness without food and provisions for 40 years, much less, 1 million plus. Taking them through wilderness, you're not working the land, you got men, women, and children. And not only is there just the logistical, you got to feed these people issues, you got these nations that are established. They have kingdoms, they have walls, they have defenses. And you're going to try to kick them out? But God was faithful. He provided for them. He gave them manna from heaven to eat. He gave them quail, gave them water from rocks. And he provided for them every step of the way. He was faithful. And I think that was something that should have, it was difficult for them to trust in, as you see how much they complained about it. They're like, you take us out here to just die in the wilderness? We'd have rather been slaves. But God was faithful, and he provided. Then it ends with, for who remembered us in our loneliness, who rescued us from our enemies, who gives food to all flesh, give thanks to the God of heaven, for his faithfulness is everlasting. And I think that's kind of neat. In part, I feel like everlasting is an aspect of faithfulness. Like, if a husband is married to his wife for 6 years, and for 5 he's faithful, for 1 he's not, is that man faithful? No, I don't think most of us would call that a faithful man. Faithfulness is measured by its completeness. The fact that it doesn't fail, right? That's faithfulness. His faithfulness is everlasting. Now, Paul was talking in 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 12. It says, "For this reason I also suffer these things, but I am not ashamed. I know who I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to protect what I have entrusted him until that day." And that's how we have trust in God today. Paul went through so many sacrifices. He was rising through the ranks of Judaism. Popular dude, gave that up for a very unpopular opinion of following this Jewish Messiah. And not only that, he was stoned, shipwrecked. Like, there's a long list of the persecution and difficulties that he dealt with in his life. But he said, you know what? I'm not ashamed of the choices I made. This was a good investment. You think about two people investing in stocks, and one invests in one that fails and one invests in one that succeeds. The one who invests in one that fails, you might feel a little ashamed, like, oh, that was pretty foolish of me. That was a bad idea there. Paul's like, none of that. I know that this is a good investment. It's faithful. It will have returns because I know who I've invested in. You trust in the faithfulness of God. And we do the same. We give our lives in his service for his glory. It says in 2 Timothy 2:13, if we are faithless, he remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. This is an important part of faithfulness. Faithfulness does not rely on others. Faith does. But faithfulness, I am faithful regardless of whether you're faithful. A husband and wife, if one is not faithful, that does not give the other the license to be unfaithful. God says, your faithfulness, I like it, but it doesn't matter for my faithfulness. I am still going to be faithful regardless of whether you are. So that was just a quick look at God. There's a whole lot more that could be said as far as his faithfulness. But what is expected of us? How are we to be faithful? In Psalm 15, the psalmist starts by saying, Lord, who may reside in your tent, and who may settle on your holy hill? The tent he's probably referring to is the tabernacle. The temple wasn't built at this time. The holy hill might have been where the Ark of the Covenant was stationed at that time. But really the question is, who's going to live in your house? Who's going to be close to you? Who's going to have a close relationship with you? Like, you don't live in close proximity to people who aren't somewhat similar, right? Who aren't like, family and you're tight. So he's asking that question, then he goes to answer it. One who walks with integrity, practices righteousness, speaks the truth in their heart. So first, integrity. Sometimes that's used in engineering, like hull integrity. Like, you got a boat. Now, if I came up to the boat, shot a hole in it, it wouldn't have integrity anymore, would it? Like, that one hole in the hull sinks it. It would not be said to be something of integrity. 100% is what integrity is. Faithfulness is 100%. Often when we think of integrity, we think of people doing what's right when no one else is looking. That's usually when people end up failing. Even a faithless person can do the right thing when someone's watching them. But a faithful person will do the right thing when no one is watching them. And that's usually what I think of when I think of integrity. And then it goes on and says, speaks truth in his heart. And some people take that as meaning that speaks the truth that is in their heart, meaning being honest. But others speaks the truth to their heart, basically. They're faithful in their thoughts. And that's a challenging one, because that's, if you're by yourself doing something, someone could pop in on you and see what you're doing. No one's going to pop into your thoughts, right? No one's here telepathic, right? Okay. She is. And that's the next level of integrity. Can you do what's right when no one's watching? And can you do what's right in your mind when no one can see? I mean, God sees, and it's important to remember that. But that's what it means to have integrity in your thoughts when no one sees you and when everyone can see you. Going on to verse 3, it says, he does not slander with his tongue, nor do evil to his neighbor, nor bring shame on his friend. This is the aspect of faithfulness that's shown in relationships. It's loyalty. There's emotional security given to the person that you care about, because they know you're not going to stab them in the back. They don't have to hear what you're saying to other people to know you're speaking well of them and not tearing them down. In Proverbs 27:6, it says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Sometimes people can do things that look one way and their heart's very different. Think of Judas. When he came up and kissed Jesus in the garden, was that a friendly thing to do? On the outside, maybe, but not the intent. And it's saying, I like how it puts faithfulness and deceit as opposites. Sometimes we think of truthfulness as just our words. Words are just a form of expression. Truthfulness is what you communicate. It could be through your actions. People say actions are worth 1,000 words, or I guess pictures, whatever. Anyways, actions speak louder than words, that's what it is. But, being faithful, being truthful with the way you act, Faithful are the wounds of a friend. So kisses of an enemy, kisses, sound like something from a friend, not from an enemy. Wounds sound like something from an enemy, right? Not from a friend. But it's saying here that faithful are the wounds of a friend. You know that though it hurts and it feels like an enemy, you know that the heart behind it is for your good. Friends don't stab you in the back, stab you in the face, okay? Verse 4, a despicable person is despised in his eyes, but he honors those who fear the Lord. He takes an oath to his own detriment and does not change. They're loyal to God. They love those who are loyal to God. They say they're going to do something, and down the road, when it's less advantageous to them, and they think, if I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't have said I was going to do that. They stick to it. They are reliable. This can be in big decisions. What's the greatest lie told in America? It's, I have read the terms and agreements. No, it's till death do us part, right? Sadly, that's one of the greatest lies told in America. Really, the world. But that's a big area where people get into it. They say, yeah, till death do us part. They make that commitment, and then a few years down the road, they're divorced. They decide, maybe not till death. It could be small things too. Like, I own a software business with Keegan, and sometimes we have a client who likes to come and work from the office earlier than most of our employees like to be there. So he coordinates with me, and I say, yeah, I'll be there Wednesday at 7. And most of the time it's fine, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'll be there, and then I forget I had something else, and it's really inconvenient for me to be there. And but all the same, I'm not going to let him down. I'm not going to let him just show up and me not be there, or tell him, hey, sorry, can't make it. I'm going to show up and be there because I told him I was going to be there. One time I just plain couldn't. I had to take my kid to the hospital. But I didn't just leave him hanging. I found someone else who could be there and take care of him. So it's even in the small things, just being faithful and being reliable. People don't have to wonder, are you going to fall through? And it says in verse 5, he does not lend his money at interest, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. One who does these things will never be shaken. So we just talked about, you don't break your promise because you're going to experience some loss. You also don't break it so that you can achieve some reward. Someone bribing you can't be bought. Integrity is something that's from the inside. It's internal discipline, not external. Nothing external is going to change your mind. Moving on in Proverbs 25:13, it says, like a cold snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him, for he refreshes the soul of his master. Now, it's not talking about it snowing at harvest time. That would be really bad. I don't know if anyone's agricultural. You don't want freezing temperatures when you're trying to harvest things. It's more of talking about, like a refreshing drink or a cold wind. A commentator I was reading talked about that people would take snow down from the mountains and hide it in cold places and bring it out. It's a little ice box or whatever. And they were thinking that's what it was referring to. And if you've ever been outside working hard in the heat, or maybe you're just running a few miles, the tastiest thing in the world is a nice cold drink. And that's what he's talking about here. Just that refreshment to your soul is a faithful messenger to those who sent him. Just someone you can rely on. I know these past 2 months, we've been in the ER 5 times with my oldest son, and many times people are asking hey, what can we do for you? How can we help? Some employees were like, hey, what do you need us to do? And I just said, take care of the clients. Just be faithful with that, so I don't have to care about it, so I can care about these other things. That was the best way for them to show love to me, was to be faithful, so that I don't have to worry about, did they send that email? Did they do that work? Did they communicate well? Just let them take care of it, so I can take care of what I need to. Now I'm going to get into a few series of parables that Jesus gave, where he was talking about faithfulness, because it was a topic he talked about a good bit. And he used this analogy of a master and a servant, or master and a slave. And him being the master, and often it's talking about his return. Later on he's going to come back. He entrusts them with things. Later on he's going to come back and ask them what they did with it. So in Luke 17, 7 through 10, he says, now which of you, having a slave plowing or tending sheep, will say to him after he comes in from the field, come immediately and recline at the table to eat? On the contrary, will he not say, prepare something for me to eat, and properly clothe yourselves, and serve me while I eat and drink. Afterwards you may eat and drink. He does not thank the slave because he did the things that were commanded, does he? So you too, when you do all the things that were commanded, you say, we are unworthy slaves. Lost my place. We are unworthy slaves. We have done only which we ought to have done. I find that interesting. I feel like most Christians feel like serving God is volunteer work. If that makes sense. Except for Jordan. He gets paid to be a Christian. So no excuse there. No. But a lot of us feel like it's volunteer work. Where, I don't know if you ever volunteered, there's a different attitude people have with volunteering versus working. Like, you have, if you volunteer and you don't like how it's going, you don't enjoy the people you're working with, you can quit, right? Like, it's not that hard. But if you don't like your job, you kind of need to work it so you can feed your hungry children, right? Like, you have obligations, and it's a little harder. But there's also sometimes a different attitude that people can bring to volunteer work where, they know they're not really getting anything directly out of it. The Christian service, the baseline for the Christian life is faithful service. I think a lot of us think that the baseline is neutrality. The baseline is Christian service. If we serve God, we deserve no special praise or reward for it. We're not earning anything before God for the good we do. And we're going to continue that thought into the next parable. So next one, Luke 12, 35 through 38. And he's talking about this is one of his kingdom parables. He says, be prepared, keep your lamps lit. You are also to be like people who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, that they may immediately open the door for him when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds on alert when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will prepare himself to serve and have them recline at the table, and he will come and serve them, whether he comes in the second watch or the third watch and finds them so. Blessed are those slaves. So saying this master goes away, he's going to party, and the slaves are going to stay awake and wait for him to show up. And, second or third watch, it could be pretty late at night, it could be early in the morning. They are losing sleep for the sake of their master not losing a few minutes waiting at the door knocking. It's like sometimes you go to Chick-fil-A, they have someone there opening the door for you, and you don't have to wait and knock. It's open. You don't have to break stride. You just walk on through. Like, they were so much more concerned about their master and his convenience. The neat thing is, when the master comes and finds them faithful, they should have just said what was said in the previous parable. We are unworthy slaves. We've only done what we ought to do. That was their job. And though that is true, though they have not earned anything before their master is a generous person and cares for them and loves them. He's like, nah, you sit back. I'm going to prepare the meal for you, okay? And that's really the heart of God. Though often in Scripture it talks about reward for good service, I think it's important to remember that reward is not earned, it is given. Though it may correlate directly to your faithfulness, it is not something you're owed. God is not unjust should he not give you anything else for the rest of your life. It's not like an employer. If I don't pay my employees, that is unjust. Okay, they earned it. But if God didn't give us anything more than he's already given us, honestly, would be more than we could ever deserve. I just think that's important perspective to have on faithfulness, understanding that faithfulness is expected and is the baseline. It's great that we serve an awesome God who rewards us and delights in our faithfulness. Moving on, I want to look at Luke 12, 42 through 48. It says, And the Lord said, Who then is the faithful, sensible steward, whom his master will put in charge of the servants to give them their rations at the proper time? So this is one aspect of faithfulness, is caring for other believers. All of us have that responsibility to some extent, but there's certain ones, pastors, teachers, leaders, are given a higher responsibility for that, to take care of the household while he's gone. Jesus cared for his disciples while he was here on earth, and in many ways he left that responsibility to others that he's empowered as well. And this master is like, who's going to be the faithful servant? He goes on to say, Blessed is that slave whom the master finds so doing when he comes. And that's faithfulness, when you're found doing it. Faithfulness is continual. If you have a job, you continue to do it. You don't have lapses in it. You shouldn't be like that employee who, when the boss walks in, have to change, off from Reddit or whatever they were doing, getting back to work, be like, oh no, he's looking now. Faithfulness doesn't need to do that, because faithfulness watches themselves. You watch yourself. You don't rely on other people to watch you to do a good job. It says, truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. So the master sees this is someone who is good at what they do. And as any wise investor pours more into them, gives them more responsibility. They were faithful with a little thing, I'm going to give them a lot more. It says, but if that slave says in his heart, my master will take a long time to come. And that's a dangerous thing to think. He didn't know when his master was going to come back. I hear this from college students a lot. I talk to them about God, and they admit, yeah, I really do need to follow God. I need to go to church, but I'm having some fun right now. And I think I'll do that after I graduate. I'll be honest, you're never going to make that commitment if that's the attitude. You're going to keep finding something else. If you think you're busy now, wait till you graduate. And that's the heart of someone, anyone can be faithful with someone watching them, but that's the heart of someone who's not faithful, who says in their mind, yeah, it'll be a while, I think I can wait, maybe I'll clean up shop once I think he's going to be back. It's not the attitude of someone who's faithful. So he says that it'd be a while, so he begins to beat the other slaves, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk. So he takes the resources and the authority that his master had given him and uses it for his own purposes and pleasure. Sometimes we do that. We view the gifts of God as ours. The gifts of God are stewardship. Even the life we have, or maybe a certain talent or ability or resource, they are still all God's. We are wholly owned by him. Nothing is our own. And to take those things and use them for ourselves rather than for his glory and the building of his church is honestly stealing. I think that can be challenging to think about the ways God has blessed you. Like maybe you're good at understanding the word, teaching. Do you just use that for yourself and your own edification, your own growth, or do you share it with others? Maybe you're good at service. Do you just serve yourself? Use that high quality that you can do for your own self or for others? How do we use the gifts that God has given us? So this man abused it for himself. He wasted his master's resources and position of authority. It says, then the master of that slave will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in two. Whew, that escalated quickly. That's pretty rough. It says, assign him a place with the unbelievers. And that slave who knew the master's will and did not get ready or act in accordance with his will received many blows, but the one who did not know it and committed acts deserving of beating will receive only a few. God's fair. As he says in the next piece, it says, to everyone who's been given much, much will be demanded. To whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more. We're going to talk about that principle a little more, but if you're given a lot, people are going to expect a lot more of you. God is going to expect a lot more of you. This next parable I want to look at, Matthew 25. It's the parable of the talents. It says, for it is just like a man about to go on a journey, who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his own ability. And he went on his journey. So it was apparently a common practice at that time. The master was probably pretty involved in the usage of his resources for business and for growth of that wealth. But if he was leaving, it's not wise to just leave it there and let it sit and not increase. So he found faithful people who worked for him and said, you're good, I'm going to give you these resources to do something with. And he spread it out according to each of their own ability. He didn't give them all the same. He gave them according to what he thought they could handle. Then it goes on and says, the one who received 5 talents immediately went and did business with them and earned 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who received 2 talents earned 2 more. But he who received the 1 talent went away and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. I think that word immediate is very important. Faithfulness is immediate. It's not, I think the master will be back around here this time. I'll plan a little before that to do something with it. They had no idea when he was coming back. They started immediately. Imagine if you were in school and your tests were not on the syllabus. You just had to be ready for them, right? Like after you hit something in class that the teacher taught, you should probably go and learn that immediately so that whenever the test came up, you'd be ready for it. And that's kind of the situation they were in here. Now, going down in verse 19, it says, "After a long time, the master of the slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more, saying, 'Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have earned 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter the joy of your master.' Also the one who had received 2 talents came up and said, 'Master, you have entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have earned 2 more talents.' His master said, 'Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter the joy of your master.'" There's a few important things here. One, there is a day of accounting. There's a day when we stand before God and give account for what we've done in our lives, how we've used what He has given us. And I think it's interesting. It's not a group grade. He didn't say, "Hey, I gave you 3 servants 8 talents. How'd you do?" And they're like, 15. 15. Wow, that's pretty good. That's like almost 100% improvement. I know I've been on group projects in school, and like my senior design, 2 of us did the work, 4 of us graduated. Like, that's just how it goes. That's not what was happening here. Though they may have worked as a team, they were graded individually. And I think that's, I want to go back to an earlier statement when he said, "Gave to each according to their ability." And now we see, what did he evaluate them on? How much they were given according to their ability. So he knew that the guy with 5, he's like, "I think you can handle 5." The guy with 2, he's like, "Maybe not 5, but 2's good for you." And then both of them saw 100% improvement. He didn't say, "Well, he got 10 and you got 4, he's a lot better." He gave the same response. "Well done, good and faithful servant." He didn't say, "You did okay," but he did really good. He knew what he'd given them. I was thinking about this in terms of, some people are more athletically inclined. Or like, I did martial arts in high school, and it was just something that, kicking people in the head came easy to me. I don't know what it was. But other people, it was a lot harder. And I didn't have to practice as much to do well, but they did. Or even I was talking to Jennifer, she did ballet for 10 years. And for her, it wasn't something that came naturally. And it was annoying to watch the people who could just it was just graceful and it just flowed and it came natural. They didn't have to study that long and practice. And I know in my own heart, human beings live up to those around them in a lot of ways, right? And if you are good at something naturally, you tend to only improve but so much. Unless you're one of those special world-class athletes who can see past everyone around you and just be good and be disciplined. Whereas the people who are less gifted have to work a lot harder. But to be honest, they're probably more faithful. Sometimes we can be gifted in something and be satisfied with just doing better than everyone else. Whereas we need to be looking at, what has God given me? It's not comparing myself to someone else, but knowing what God has given me, how am I going to be faithful with that? Don't look at others. Because both sides of the coin are dangerous. If I am gifted, I may not reach full potential because I'm looking at others who may be less gifted. If I'm less gifted, I may look at people who are gifted and think, why do I even try? I can't compare to that. What difference is it going to make? Maybe the guy with 1 talent thought that, my master has a giant hoard of wealth. What is me doing anything with this talent going to do? If he gave me 1 talent, maybe he thinks I'm just not that good. And I should, maybe he thinks I'm going to fail. I should just not do anything with it so at least I don't fail. That's the kind of dangerous thoughts that we can have. But we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. So going down to verse 24, we're going to see how it worked out for the guy with the 1 talent. So now the one who had received the 1 talent also came up and said, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid. So I went and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what's yours." So he had a very different response than the people who actually did something. He started with offering excuses. That's what we do, right? If we're unfaithful, if we have messed up, we try to make it look like it was someone else's fault. And this guy had some guts, because the person he picked to blame was the master. And he starts off by saying, "You know what? If you weren't such a harsh person, I would feel like I had the freedom to fail and try, and because you were like that, I didn't feel like I had that freedom. So anyways, I thought the best thing was for me to keep it safe. Here you have what's yours. The master calls him out on this. He says in verse 26, "But the master answered and said, 'You worthless, lazy slave. Did you know,'" and I imagine this very sarcastically, him speaking, "'Did you know that I reap where I did not sow, and gather where I did not scatter seed? Then you ought to put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest.'" He's saying, first of all, he called it for what it is. He's like, that's an excuse. It's because you're lazy. Like, that's where the fault lies. It's not on me. It's like, and honestly, if you were at least afraid of me, you should have done something. Like, you should have known better. And if you lack the entrepreneurial spirit to do something with that I gave you, give it to someone else. Put it in the bank. Maybe they can do something with it. He did not accept that excuse. "Therefore, take the talent away from him and give it to the one who has 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. And throw the worthless slave into the outer darkness, in that place where there are weeping and gnashing of teeth." Like any good investor, he saw, it's like a guy who had 3 stocks that he invested in. 1 tanked, 2 did well. Move the resources to the ones that are doing well. So, in Luke 16:10, Jesus is saying, "The one who's faithful in a very little thing is also faithful in much. The one who's unrighteous in a very little thing is also unrighteous in much." I think sometimes we can have that attitude if we feel like we don't have a lot of responsibility, or there's not a lot, if we were faithful, that we could accomplish in a certain area. And we can despair and think, I'll never be like, pick some person you look up to. Or maybe, I hear people complain about this with money. They're like, oh man, if I just had as much money as like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, like I would solve world hunger and all this other stuff. But realistically, if you're not using the little you have to care for others, you're probably not going to when you have more. Honestly, most of you probably give more to charity or to causes of helping people than Jeff Bezos, however you say his last name, Amazon dude, than he gives. You see these huge amounts he gives, but in comparison to what he actually has, it's really not that much. It's a drop in the bucket. But anyways, faithfulness with the little things that we have is the path to faithfulness with more. Galatians 6:5-8 says, "Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart, as to Christ, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to people, knowing that whatever good each one does, he will receive this back from the Lord, whether slave or free." That's such an important topic, or concept for faithfulness, is as to the Lord. If you're married, your faithfulness, well, first off, you are faithful to one being, and that is God. All other faithfulness is delegated from that. When you're married, your faithfulness is primarily to God. Like, that's why you don't mess up, not because your spouse is meeting your needs in the way you think they should. That is not where faithfulness comes from. That's very situational. And if that's what you're relying on, it's not going to work out. It's unlikely to, at least. Faithfulness is based on working for God. He's the one who sees our thoughts, our actions when no one else does. And understanding, that I am serving him. That'll change the quality of your work. You'll do good work even if you're working for a bad boss. You're serving someone who you don't really care for, because you're going to take care for that work as if it was for God. You're going to be faithful in it as if it is for God. So just remember that when I serve or when I'm faithful to someone, it's as to the Lord, not as to that person. The last verse in Revelation 2:10 says, "Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." Faithfulness is measured by its completeness, by its follow-through, its consistency, and it's faithful to the end. So how do we be faithful? I want to review a few points. First, faithfulness is love. Faithfulness is how you can care for other people. A lot of us take for granted the faithfulness of other people. Maybe a child for their parents. Maybe they have a stable home, stable income. Just the faithfulness of that parent and that It's maybe also faithfulness of loving people in the small things. You know, if you're going to give someone a ride, showing up when you tell them you're going to be there. Or if you're getting the ride, being there before they get there. You know, like determining to not inconvenience people and to stick to your word and do what you said you were going to do. The second point is know what's expected of you. It's hard to meet your expectations if you don't know what they are. I know when I meet with employees and we have